Listen, bitches. Don't go disrespecting my katana. I don't know how many fucking times I have to tell you. You know, I would pull it, but I can't. Because if I did, well, then I'd have to kill you. So we'll just do the next best thing, shall we? How about this? Sake? What is this? Gekkeikan. Japanese sake. But it's made in America. What the fuck? A lot of people drink this warm. You heat the water to 105 degrees, pour it in a bowl, let the bottle rest in it till it warms it up. I don't subscribe to that. I don't drink any type of alcohol warm. I even put my Hennessy in the freezer. It's just how it goes. It's just how I am. Kampai. Tasty. Time to make another ice video. Let me put this cap back on here before I kick the shit over. And the whole Nissan smells of sake. Now, tomorrow is the big meetup, the big hoedown, the big hootenanny, the big get together at the Honeywell Center in that fucking shithole state of Indiana. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Yeah. The Honeywell Center in that shithole state of Indiana. And when I say Indiana is a fucking shithole, I mean it. Like, I know people in Indiana that I got real life fucking beef with. For real. Like, if I saw them in my neighborhood, it would be on site. Real fucking talk. Fuck Indiana. But yeah, SWB, I could really care less. In a lot of ways, I hope he is Jeffrey Dahmer. But Robert Douglas, I done told you, watch your back, guy. Watch your back. Because, Reek Geeb is a fucking creep. That guy's a fucking creep. I don't know if he has anything planned. I don't know if he's going to do anything or not. But I wouldn't put nothing past him. Enough jibber jabber for today. Ice. Cinco.
People with the loudest voices or the highest paying customers, the right to control the action is like a godlike power. Think about the virtual reality video game element that had just been added to a real situation in real time. Here's what historian Garrett G. Fagan writes, quote, "The execution phase of arena spectacles cannot have been anything other than viscerally brutal. This was sheer murder, the disposal of what was considered human garbage, while the Roman writer Seneca was repelled by what he saw during the lunchtime break. He records various comments that the people shouted out as the butchery proceeded. They demanded various types of action. Seneca adds a further noteworthy detail, often overlooked. All of this happened when the arena was practically empty. Pure butchery, apparently, was not to everyone's taste. End quote. He then points out that Seneca's trying to make a point about how, crowds are bad for your morals, and you tend to go down to the lowest common denominator, essentially, in a crowd. But then he says, quote, Seneca's account reveals something of the spectator's mental state. During executions, their ability to direct the course of action on the sand would have strengthened an already formidable sense of empowerment. Indeed, the ultimate sense of empowerment over life and death itself. This was one of the clearest manifestations of the crowd as domini, lords of the arena. The crowd merely called out its wishes to see them enacted. End quote. It's at this point I have to take 3 steps back for a second. That is such a wickedly weird concept, if you think about it. I mean, if you really go, what the heck was that like to have a person walk into the arena? Historian Donald G. Kyle describes them as, naked or nearly naked, with a placard either held with them or around their neck explaining what their crimes are and their sentence is, and then tying them to a stake, or he says, alternatively, just leaving them in the arena alone, unarmed, to face the fate. There's a sentenced fate that they're supposed to face, but as historian Garrett G. Fagan pointed out, it might be open to interpretation depending on what the crowd wanted. You want to burn somebody, there's fire there. You want to rip pieces of them apart, there's implements available. You want to pour something hot, molten metal of some sort on them, we got some right here. As I've said before, I am fascinated by the extremes of the human experience, and I'm not sure there's anything far greater in terms of extremes than being a condemned, prisoner who's going to die via execution. If you had a scale of easiest way to be executed and hardest way to be executed, I think these days we do it about as easily as we can make it, lethal injections and stuff like that. But our sensibilities are different than the sensibilities of these earlier eras, where people dying at executions wasn't the goal. It was a byproduct of the goal. The goal was the suffering. And in the case of Rome, the suffering wasn't just to pay for the crime, it was to entertain the crowd. And I'm hard-pressed to find a situation in terms of being executed and putting yourself in the position of the condemned that would frighten or scare me or drive me out of my mind as I thought about what was going to happen, as much as the situation, in the Roman arena. But this may be personality-based. I mean, you go to some of these other cultures, the Japanese have thought about every way that they can possibly kill convicts and prisoners and people they don't like, for example. Maybe they'll boil you. Does it help if you know that's what they're going to do? Tomorrow morning you're going to get boiled. There was a history I was reading connected to this, and I'm going from memory here, but they had been talking about someone who's going to be beheaded in the morning, and the question was, how does one prepare themselves for that? The night before, what's going through your head? What are the mental and physical preparations? I mean, it's not the kind of thing that most people throughout history have had to think about, right? Although we all know, as I think I said earlier, if you added up all the people throughout history that have been in this position, it's a sizable number. If you're someone like yours truly, though, and someone says, you have a choice between knowing what they're going to do to you tomorrow or not knowing what they're going to do to you tomorrow, my personality wants to know, for whatever reason. So for me, the idea that you could go into this arena ostensibly to be lit on fire and burned to death, but if the crowd has a better idea, we may go with that. That would frighten me more than having someone say, well, they're going to tear you apart tomorrow with tongs. At least I can sort of mentally prepare myself. How would someone prepare themselves to be beheaded in the morning? Well, it would sure help to know that that's what was coming, at least as my personality is sort of organized. Now, what might they do to you? Well, the sky's the limit in terms of the inventiveness of man to try to figure out ways, not just ways to, add a little variety to the situation, but ways that would even, entertain the crowd more. If you go down the list of things, crucifixion's on there, but crucifixion's slow, so they often would combine, Donald G. Kyle says, crucifixion with some other punishment that they like. Fire was used a lot. They like fire in the arena. But, and it surprised me to actually read this. I didn't know this. But Kyle says that the number one way people died in the arena was due to beasts, wild animals. And while I knew that that was big in the arena, I had no idea that it might be the number one cause of death to the people they were dragging out of there. I do know, and Kyle has something in his notes about it, where he says that there was quite an emphasis on finding these animals for the arena. By the way, just like there was a big emphasis on finding the people for the arena too. It's very strange to think about this, but here in the new media world, we always talk about needing content to keep the audience satisfied. Well, if you think about it that way, and they did, the content that was needed at these games, and not just the ones in Rome, but all the off-Broadway areas too, were the people. Who's going to die in the arena? Well, we got some slaves, and this is actually true. They have, accounts where they try to figure out, okay, we've got some slaves from this uprising in Judea. Okay, let's parcel them out. They need them for games here. They need them for games here. I mean, literally, it is providing content for these shows. And as I said, there's other things at the shows. There's performers and magicians and jugglers, all kinds of fun things. But if you were to look at the posters that they put up all over the city announcing that these are coming, the violent parts are often sort of the main events. And in terms of animals, to get back to the beasts question, Kyle says that they wanted real wild ones. They didn't want anything raised in captivity. They didn't want anything that had been in captivity very long, because after all, if you're selling, we have a lot of wild lions on your little posters all around your city to get people to come to the show. You don't want them to get there and find out that the lions don't do much, because they're just waiting for you to throw their typical meat lunch to them. You want something that's going to go after these people you've tied to the crosses. And I should point out, but I don't want to go there because there's a lot of controversy as to how far you can take what was going on in the arena, because there's accounts that may or may not try to overhype some of this stuff. But there are stuff, and again, I don't want to get into it, I mean, there's stuff about women are going to come in here and be forcibly raped by bulls before they're put to death. I mean, whether or not these things happen, the thought that that would even be thrown out there by some inventive mind as something that people would like to see is extremely disturbing. For a modern person, and this is perhaps a sexist way of thinking, but I think it's ingrained in some of us, the idea of watching women die in the arena is more upsetting than watching the men, but it didn't seem to bother the crowd at all. Watching women ripped apart by beasts was going to be just as fun as watching men ripped apart by beasts. It's hard for we modern people to get our minds around this, especially since to me this is so different than, say, the gladiator fights, which maybe we could conceive as something that's a much more push to the edge version of things we already like. Ever been to a big boxing fight in Las Vegas or something? I mean, this is a violent sporting event, but the buzz amongst the crowd, and there's almost nothing I've ever experienced like it. And you think to yourself, well, listen, it's very barbaric, but you can see the